So while all the headlines are generally about the Strait of Hormuz and what's happening in that area, where the Americans say that their objective right now is to make sure that the Strait of Hormuz is open and to degrade the Iranian capabilities, and starting to hit some civilian targets like bridges, and Trump is talking about hitting infrastructure targets. Whether or not that will bring down the regime, I'm skeptical. Watch the other video I put out earlier about some things that I think the Americans should be doing to really move this along towards victory. But we've had a very interesting and significant escalation over the course of the last day that I want to share with you. And it leads into a couple of other side plots that are going on. That's what I like to do on this channel, is make sure that we're informed about all of the different things that are happening. So let's take a look at this first headline. U.S. strikes Iran's Loristan and Bushehr provinces as crypto markets flash risk-off signals. Now, this is not about crypto. I don't really care about crypto. Don't know much about it. And this is a crypto website. But this is a story that really just broke just in the last few hours. I saw it on Iranian state media, and I didn't want to just rely on that. And I looked to see who else is covering it. And there's a few other outlets around the world that are covering this story. But they all say the same thing. U.S. military forces struck targets in Iran's Loristan and Bushehr provinces, hitting areas in the Vasian district and near the city of Bushehr. The strikes mark a continued escalation in hostilities that has kept global markets on edge and pushed crypto traders toward the exits. And in the so if we go to this area, to the Vasian district, let's just go ahead and pull it up here. Vasian district in Loristan province. And what do we see here? Where are we? Where in Iran are we located? We're right next to Khorramabad. Okay, this is let's pull up the map this way. So here's Iran. Here's the Strait of Hormuz down here, right? Here's Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, and here is the area that they hit. Nowhere near the Strait of Hormuz. Why is the United States bombing Loristan? What exists here? Well, let's first take a look at a few other headlines from the last day, and then we'll come back to why the United States was targeting this area right here today. So we have IRGC strikes U.S. HIMARS in Kuwait, target anti-Iran militants in northern Iraq. And Iran strikes eastern Syria in first such attack during current war. And IRGC announces strikes on U.S. military assets in Jordan. Now, they've been attacking Jordan for a while now. We've talked about that. There's no need to read this article. It just talks about how they're hitting the Muwafaq Salti air base. That's a big U.S. air base in Jordan. Why were they striking Syria? Iran struck eastern Syria on Friday, today. Iranian state media and Syrian military sources said in the first attack by Tehran on Syrian territory in this war, the IRGC said they attacked a U.S. Special Operations Command Center in the Al-Tanf region at Al-Tanf in Syria in retaliation for the killing of some Iranian soldiers. And of course, they're striking Kuwait. So what does all this have to do with this area? Well, take a look at where Strait of Hormuz is, look at where Kuwait is, and look at where this area is, Vasian. And so what's here? This is a very mountainous area, and there is a base here. There's a base right next to Khorramabad that is a major underground missile location. You know, you've heard about these underground missile sites in Iran where they dug deep under some large mountain to create a storehouse and a missile launch location. So there's a big base here called the Imam Ali base out here right near Khorramabad. And you also have the Bushehr nuclear reactor, which is out in this region. But that's why they would be striking out here, okay? In other words, if there are missiles being launched at Jordan, if there are missiles being launched at Kuwait, if there are missiles being launched at Syria, they're likely coming from this area right here. They're not coming from some other part of Iran. And this is a big missile area. It's also right next to the Kurdish area of Iraq, which is Erbil and Sulaymaniyah, which they've been attacking, which Iran has been attacking as well. So here you see the Americans going after specifically the missile infrastructure, the missile depots, in an effort to get them to neutralize the Iranian ability to retaliate and to attack the various American assets and American partners in the region. That is my interpretation of why the Americans are striking the Vasian in the Loristan province. That's my take on it. Okay, so I can't confirm anything, but it's just I'm putting two and two together. It makes sense. If in the same day the Iranians, or in the last 2 days, the Iranians are attacking Syria, Jordan, Kuwait, and sites and Iraqi and militias in Iraq, as we saw here, that they're right anti-Iran militants in northern Iraq, which are in that same area here. I think it even says the location of them, of the militants in Iraq. Yeah, they're in Sulaymaniyah. So Sulaymaniyah is right here. This is Sulaymaniyah. So if this is what's getting attacked, Jordan, Syria, Iraq Kuwait is getting attacked, it's likely happening from here. That's what the United States is doing. That's my reading between the lines of what is going on. Now, another fascinating story that is broken, or that I saw this article that was published just yesterday. Look at this. Attacks on guards signal a new phase in Iran. What is this? Clandestine opposition groups in Iran that initially used Molotov cocktails against security facilities say they have recently begun using assault rifles and grenades to target members of the IRGC and the Basij. MBN, that's this news outlet, Al-Hura, they conducted interviews with 6 activists who are from various armed groups operating in several different parts of Iran, including in major cities such as Tehran, Isfahan, and Mashhad. Now, on the map, Tehran is here and Isfahan is here. Mashhad's up here. But Tehran and Isfahan especially that's the center of the country. And this, renegade militias or anti-regime militias tend to operate on the margins near the border areas. And this is significant that these activists say that they're starting to operate in the cities. According to their accounts, the attacks are not directed by a single unified movement, but are carried out by separate groups with different histories, organizational structures, and objectives. The independent activists said they had turned to armed resistance in response to what they described as killings, arrests, and torture carried out by members of the Basij and the IRGC against anti-government protesters. According to their accounts, the campaign began with Molotov cocktail attacks on Basij bases, police stations, checkpoints, and patrols in major cities, such as Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan. The escalation became more pronounced in late May, when some groups moved from attacking facilities to targeting individuals they accused of involvement in the arrest, torture, and killings of protesters. So they're like assassinating IRGC and Basij people. Armed activity is not new in Iran's Kurdish, Ahwazi, and Baluch regions, where opposition organizations have operated for decades from areas near the border and the mountains. If confirmed, the emergence of small armed groups operating in major cities would mark a departure from Iran's traditional pattern of insurgent violence, which has largely been concentrated in peripheral regions. Let's keep going with this. This is really an important narrative. Amjad Hossein Panahi, a senior official in the Kurdish opposition party, Kamala, said that the Iranian government's continued crackdown on protesters had pushed some Iranians, particularly the youth, to abandon hopes of peaceful political change. They're not just sitting at home waiting to be called out into the streets. He said conditions in Iran's Kurdish region differ from those in the major cities because armed operations there are carried out by long-established political organizations operating under their own command structures. Panahi described the recent attacks as the beginning of an armed uprising against the government. So these aren't Kurdish kids. They're joining up with the Kurds a little bit, but this is a new thing. This is an armed uprising of young Iranians that is just beginning. It's a characterization that reflects the position of an opposition party which maintains an armed organization inside Iran. However, there is no independent evidence that the scattered attacks have evolved into a coordinated or large-scale insurgency. On June 28th, last month, The Tasnim news agency that's affiliated with the IRGC reported that 2 guards were killed in the city of Pave in Kermanshah province after gunmen opened fire and fled the scene. A senior military official in the Kurdish opposition party said that because of security restrictions and the difficulty of maintaining communications, internal organizations and military wings sometimes decide to carry out attacks without consulting senior leaders based outside Iran. So he's basically saying we don't know anything about it. That's the point of that. In urban areas, operations have been focused on checkpoints, patrols, and smaller or isolated security facilities before attackers withdraw to avoid capture. So what are we seeing? We're seeing like terrorism, so to speak, of these loose groups of young Iranians who are getting weapons, and they're carrying out like these little assassination and targeted attacks at Basij and IRGC checkpoints and patrols. That's what they're doing. Independent youth groups, some of which refer to themselves as resistance units, say they are active inside the cities, including Tehran, Mashhad, Isfahan, and Shiraz. The scale of the phenomenon and whether it can be sustained are questions difficult to assess. The groups that spoke to MBN said that they operate independently, and there's no indication that they share a common leadership or a unified strategy. Still, the apparent spread of some armed activity into major cities away from the border regions where Iran's insurgent violence has historically been situated could present Iranian authorities with a new security challenge. From these words to God's ears, hopefully this will expand. So this is an important side plot that is clearly developing. That is clearly developing in Iran, and we have to watch it closely. Now, could it lead to regime change? And that's the question we're going to be dealing with in the webinar this coming Monday. Are we headed for regime change? What to expect from the Middle East? We are at a critical point in this whole story, folks. We are at a critical point. Trump has stepped away from the MOU, says the ceasefire is over. We now see this escalation beyond the Strait of Hormuz, where the Americans are going after sites in other areas. We know that they're starting to attack bridges and infrastructure. And we see that the Iranians are starting to fire in all directions again, hitting Syria for the first time, hitting Iraq, hitting Jordan, hitting Kuwait. We are at an escalatory point. And now with this story, very interesting little story about how there actually is some armed activity beginning. These groups of young Iranians who've had enough are now, carrying out these terrorist type activities. This only underscores a point I made in a video earlier today. It's probably out already by the time this one comes out, because I made it first. We'll see what my back end team does. But I made a point in there that I believe that this is the time now for the Americans to tell the Iranian people to come back out into the streets and provide them air cover and resume what Israel was doing in the last few weeks of the war, of the first stage of the war in February, in March and the beginning of April. The last couple of weeks of that, Israel had started carrying out drone strikes against Basij and IRGC checkpoints and patrols and headquarters. And if we go back to that, we go back to giving air cover. We give air cover to the protesters, call them back out into the street. And now we're hearing that there is some activity, some armed activity aimed at the IRGC and the Basij. I believe that we'll start seeing mass defections from the IRGC and the Basij, which stopped when the ceasefire went into effect and the Iranian regime sort of took control again and started getting some money. Those defections slowed down. We could see a massive wave of defections, especially if President Trump says he's going to give cover to the protesters. If that happens now, we could be in good shape. You don't want to miss this webinar. This webinar on Monday, this coming Monday, a couple days from now, Monday, July 20th. We'll be starting at 1 p.m. It'll be live, 1 p.m. Eastern time, 8 p.m. in Israel. Figure out the rest of it yourself in terms of time. But it doesn't matter if you can't make it, because if you register for this webinar, you will receive an email with a link to watch the full webinar after it airs. So make sure that you're registered so you can see it. We have an unbelievable all-star lineup of experts. Brigadier General Amira Vivi of the Israel Defense and Security Forum, Brian Kennedy, former president and current senior fellow at the Claremont Institute, Dr. David Wormser of the Center for Security Policy, one of the top experts in the Middle East in the world, and Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, where he's a senior fellow. He's also a former spokesman for the IDF. You can register at the link in the description of this video, Israel365.com/regime, or you could scan this QR code and you'll make sure that you're there. So just to sum up everything that we're saying here, this is all just so critical. This is all so critical that there's an escalation going on. You know, the Iranians are trying to hit as many different U.S. targets as possible with not much success. The Americans are expanding their target list. That's what we're seeing here. They're expanding it. It's not just about securing shipping in the Strait of Hormuz anymore. And with the new sanctions that were put on a few days ago by the U.S. Treasury Department, you put that together with all of this, and this is not, what the Americans are doing now is not designed to bring the Iranians back to the negotiating table to pick up where we left off. It does not look like that at all. It really looks like we're headed towards some sort of regime change. And if these reports are true about these young activists who are taking up arms and starting to carry out sort of terrorist activity against the regime, if that could escalate, if that could get built up a little bit more, if we could see a turning up of the volume on that while everything else is going on, we could be headed. We really could be headed for the regime collapsing, together with all of the economic stuff that's going on. I hope you saw that video I made, was about last week, about the Iranian economy. I've said it before and I'll say it again. When regimes collapse, they don't announce it ahead of time. And it's always a surprise. When the Soviet Union fell, when Libya fell, when Syria fell, when regimes collapse, it tends to take everyone by surprise. You never expect it the day before. We don't know when it's going to happen. And the Iranian regime is a big one. And what that collapse looks like, we'll have to wait and see. And but again, all of the indications that we have here is that we are moving in that direction. And we're going to keep our eye on the prize here. We're going to keep our eye on everything that's going on. And I will continue to bring you all of these side plots, as I call them, that help us understand the full picture of what's actually happening in this war and in the Middle East in general. God bless you. Have a wonderful Shabbat. Have a wonderful weekend. And that's it for me for this week. And I'll see you next week. God bless.